So this is the sound of a roulette wheel. It's a game that played in casinos. Many people know it, and for those of you who have never played, I'm going to give you, the 5,000-foot basic view about how the game actually works. So in the United States, generally speaking, there are 38 slots. They're numbered 1 through 36. There's a single 0, and there's a double 0. So a total of 38 slots. 18 of them are black, 18 of them are red, and there are 2 green slots, usually the 0 and the double 0. And so now the ball spins, just like the original sound that we heard at the beginning of this segment. And I think we can all agree that the ball and where it lands is random. Where it's going to go, nobody can predict. And very importantly, it has an equal chance of landing in any individual spot. Right? In other words, it could land on 1, it could land on 17. And the chance of landing on any spot is 1 out of 38. Pretty simple, straightforward, right? It just seems if you go to the casino that, it never lands on your number. That's something separate, right? But we can say that before the ball goes, before the ball is spun, the wheel is spun, it is exactly 1 out of 38 chance of landing in any specific single slot. Okay. So how does the game actually work? Well, the game actually works that you can place a chip, and let's just call it a $1 chip, on any single number. And let's just make up the number. We'll call it 17. So if you bet $1 and put it on 17, and the ball magically lands on the slot, which has the number of 17, what do you get? Well, you get 34, right? For every dollar that you put onto that square on the roulette board. And so you get your 34 and you get your dollar back for a total of 35. Now, we had already just discussed, right? Which is that the probability of the ball landing in any spot was 1 out of 38. Yet you only ended up with 35. Right? In other words, you didn't get your proper amount of money back. And by proper, what I mean, adjusted for the fact that it was only a 1 in 38 chance, even if you got it exactly right, you only got 35 at the end of the spin, and that money is yours. Right? So as a result, you can see what has happened. You didn't get your exact money back, and you can do this again. You can put $1 on every single square, right? 1 through 36, 1 on a 0, 1 on a double 0. You spin the ball, it rolls and lands on 29. You get your dollar back that you originally bet. You get 34 extra, right? And you lose on every other of the single slots. So in other words, for sure, you've lost 3. Okay? And this is gambling. And it is very important to understand the definition we are going to use here for what gambling actually is. What gambling actually is that you know the probability in advance and you do it anyway. That's it. Right? It's undisputed what we've just discussed over the last few minutes, right? 1 out of 38 chance to be in any single slot. You bet your dollar. You never end up with 38 back at the end of it, even if you hit, even if the ball landed exactly in the slot. That's gambling. Because you know you're not going to get your all 38 back, right? You do it anyway. So now let's change the game a little bit. Let's change the rules of the game. In other words, so as you probably know, if you go into a casino, that the rules are regulated by someone, right? Gaming commission, whoever that is, okay? Someone's making the rules. And they're the ones who said, well, you've got to pay 34 and then give the dollar back so you get 35 if the ball lands directly on 17 where you placed your chip. Let's say, however, now that the regulator says, okay, if the person puts a chip on 17 and the ball lands on 17, or whatever the designated slot is, that the casino has to give you 42 and then your dollar back. In other words, at the end of the spin, you get your dollar back and you get 42 extra for a total of 43. Okay, what would happen then? What would happen then is you are always going to win, right? Because you could just then put one chip on every single square. You get your 43 back. You lose 37. Right, because you've lost on all the other squares where it did not hit, right? So you get your 43, you lost 37, you are guaranteed to win 6. So what would you do? You would bet the maximum, right? I mean, whatever the maximum is. You didn't have enough money in your pocket. What do? You call up all your friends. Tell them, send me some money. Venmo me some money, whatever it would be, right? You max out your credit card and get a cash advance. You drive to the bank and see if you get an Insta loan, if that even exists, whatever it is, right? Because you're for sure going to win 6, for sure. What actually would happen if that were the case? Let me tell you what would happen. The casino would close the game. Why? Because the casino understands that there's a 1 out of 38 chance, right? And we just happen to call it a casino. I mean, you could call it any party, right? In other words, that the probability was exactly 1 out of 38. That is undisputed. And if the rules of the game is that the loser had to pay out 43, the person running the game just simply says, we're closed. This is a sure loss for us. Forget it. Also, quite obvious. Now let's continue on with this game, this contorted game, where if you put a chip on 17 and the ball landed on 17, then you would get, 42 plus 1, which is 43 in total. Okay, so clearly, if you could bet $1 on this game, you do it. You do it. I mean, there's no question. Now, however, you have a little twist. And the twist here is that you must, in order to be able to play this game, you must put at least $1 million on every single square for a total of $38 million. That is your cost that you need to put on the table in cash, right? So that you could buy 38 chips, each worth $1 million. So now you can see, there's a practical problem, right? The practical problem is the number of people who have $38 million to bring to the casino in order to play this special game of roulette, even if it was a guaranteed win. So what would happen, right? You'd have a billionaire. The billionaire is going to be at the table, right? For sure. I promise you, right? Because if they know that there's a free, what did I call it? If I said that there's a free $5 million per every spin, you can be darn sure the billionaire is going to be at the table, right? They can afford it. They're going to play it. It doesn't matter. The cost is not prohibitive. To the most of us, this is unattainable. We cannot play. We cannot gain entry into this game. Okay? We're going to call this, example A. Example A. Right? So we had the base case of how roulette actually works. Right? We know what the probability is. We know what gambling is. And we now have example A. Okay? Very important here. Now, why is that important? It's important because the regulator, the person who said, whoever governs this game, has changed the rule. Right? He's changed the rule. That group has changed the rule so that the payout guarantees a win. So the casino says, no, we're going to close this game. That's what we would want to do. Regulator says, okay, if you're going to close roulette, you're also going to turn off all your slots machines, all your dice, whatever other games exist in that casino. Right? So then the casino says, all right, fine, we're going to play, but the minimum has to be $1 million per square. So you have to bring $38 million at the minimum in order to play this game. Okay. So now you can see it's a far less popular game. Casino's going to lose. So the number of entrants, what did they do? They limited the number of entrants if they even offered the game whatsoever. What in the world does this have to do with financial matters? Financial planning matters? What is it? Well, this silly example, simple example, right? It explains health insurance. It explains the Affordable Care Act. It explains people's motivation and the violent debate around health insurance. What is that? Okay, now instead of the game, now all of a sudden, let's just say that the player has type 1 diabetes and is 900 pounds and takes 90 units of insulin a day. That person is in trouble, right? I mean, I'm not hoping anything bad happens to him, but let's just face it, that person has serious health matters, right? They're going to have to go to the doctor. They're going to want to buy highest quality health insurance. Guess what? Under the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies must sell to this 900-pound man at the same price as the 150-pound, 170-pound, 5'9" Mr. Perfect. That is the price of admission that the state regulators and the federal government have placed on insurance companies in order to sell health insurance. You want to sell health insurance? You have to sell it at this particular price assuming that those two players were the same age and sex. Even though we can agree those two people are radically different from each other. That's the rule. That's the rule. And now you can understand what the 900-pound man would say. He loves it. He loves it. Right? Because he is highly probable to use the health insurance. The 170-pound, 5'10" Mr. Perfect, he hates it. He hates it. Why? Because the price is going to be way too high. He's always going to be paying this dollar, and he's never going to get above 38, or most likely not going to get above 38, whereas the 900-pound man is almost certainly going to get his 43. Does that make sense? Right? I mean, you can see it, that the probabilities for the two players is radically different. How they value this game and the payout structure is entirely different from each other. And the rules set by the regulator have told the casino or have told the insurance company, too bad, you've got to sell at that price, you've got to pay out as it's written in advance, irrespective of the player. Irrespective of the player.
That's what health insurance does today. That's the Affordable Care Act. That also is Medicare. That also is Medicare. Okay? When you first turn 65, you have unlimited rights. You get to buy at the same price as the next guy, no matter what your background is, no questions asked, period. And now you can understand the logic. You can understand the logic. Why? Take the 900-pound man, right? To this person, the value of this game, the value of this exercise is so valuable to him that he's willing to pay a very high price. Because why? Because his payout is going to be so high. He's going to get 43. He's going to get 44, 45, 46, 50. At the same price that the 170-pound man, right, who never goes to the doctor, who's Mr. Bulletproof, Mr. Perfect. That's what health insurance does. That's the Affordable Care Act. And you can see that makes it very unique compared to other types of insurance. Very unique. So for example, let's say you try to buy auto insurance. Well, guess what you have to do? You've got to put down your credit record. You've got to give them your driving record. And your price will be adjusted. I promise. Right? Everyone knows this. Very clear. Very clear. Let's say, for example, you're trying to buy homeowners insurance. What do they ask? Well, first and foremost, they ask about the value of your house, right? They ask what the neighborhood is like. They know how much this house is worth, and how much it's worth is pretty much, in the context of the neighborhood. And then they're going to continue to ask questions, aren't they? Do you have a wood-burning stove? Do you live in a location which is a high crime area where there can be damage to the home, for example? Right? In other words, you get these other follow-up questions, and guess what? Your price changes. Your price changes. You don't get to stand up to the roulette wheel and put a single chip at the same price if you're 900 pounds as you were able to as the 170-pound person. That doesn't exist in homeowners insurance. That doesn't exist in auto insurance. So it's fundamentally different, right? So what ends up happening, and you can see it right away. Everyone knows about homeowners insurance and auto insurance, that this is the way that it works. Renter's insurance. They ask you, how much stuff do you have? How valuable is it? Your price changes, right? The payout's different. So the price changes. Of course it does. You know what people do? You know what everyday people do? They lump these types of insurances together as if they are the same thing. They're not the same thing, right? The price changes under homeowners insurance or auto insurance. The price is uniform for the 170-pound man versus the 900-pound man. That's a huge difference. The payout's different. The probability of payout is different. But the price stayed the same under health insurance. The price varies for homeowners insurance, auto insurance, life insurance. Absolutely changes, right? Life insurance company doesn't sell to the 900-pound man. Not usually. If you have to buy a $100,000 policy, can't usually get it. Okay. So in addition to that, what else? So what else are the differences? And we're just taking the simple example, right? Health insurance, auto insurance, homeowners insurance. What else? Well, let's say, for example, right, under health insurance, the 900-pound man has paid the same price as the 170-pound Mr. Perfect. And then starts to require healthcare services. In other words, he starts getting benefits. Under health insurance, the way the Affordable Care Act works is what? He can keep receiving benefits with no limit. He can get $1,000 of benefits. He can get $1 million of benefits. He can get $20 million of benefits. And guess what the insurance company can say? Nothing. Nothing. Under homeowners insurance, what do you get? Your house burns down for some freak of nature that is still covered by your policy. What happens? What do you get? Do you get an amount which is 10 times the value of your house? You don't. You're going to end up debating with the insurance company how much was your actual loss. And let's just call your loss X dollars. Do you get 5X? You never get 5X. You have a limit. There's a limit, and it's on the value of the stuff you have lost. Under health insurance, what's your payout? Your payout has unlimited upside in terms of the value of the benefits you can receive. You can see how radically different it is. So as soon as I changed it, as soon as I explained it in roulette terms, it becomes very, very clear. Very clear. Right? In other words, it costs this chip. And the price of the chip was the same between the two players, irrespective of 170 pounds or 900 pounds, same age, male. Versus risky driver and safe driver. Versus house with a wood-burning stove and a house without a wood-burning stove. The prices are different. And the payout structure is different. Do you see it? The payout structure is different. Right from the get-go. You can see what I'm saying from the beginning in the intro. Nevertheless, when I talk to persons about, certain financial planning matters, people try to use generalizations. Oh, it's kind of like homeowners insurance. Or vice versa. No, it's not.
Before we move on too much further, it's not part of this comparison or analysis, if you call it analysis. We're not discussing whether or not the cost of a CT scan should be $3,000 or whether the cost of hemophilia treatment should be $1 million a month.
That is not part of this conversation, right? The objection to the $1 million a month has nothing to do with the calculations and the analogies that I've just drawn. You're talking about the cost of the healthcare system, right? Your objection to the $1 million a month is the fact that you don't like the way that the costing of the healthcare system was determined. That is different than the rules of analyzing the price and the payout. It's different. So what ends up happening is, and you can just imagine what ends up happening. So I'm on social media and I have a book to sell. And it's called Maximize Your Medicare. You know this. This is Maximize Your Medicare podcast. Anyway, you can see you should see the reactions to advertisements that I run. And I run it as an experiment because I just want to see what people's reaction will be. I don't spend thousands of dollars a month. Forget it. No, I would never do that. But for, X dollars a month, I do it just for the exercise to seeing people's reactions. And on more than one occasion, the criticism isn't about the book. It's about, well, it's no fair that a CT scan in the United States costs $3,000. The book, my analysis, my role here as a person to help people understand the financial implications isn't addressing the fairness of the healthcare system at all. Therefore, the criticisms that you have that I heard on my, website or whatever it would be, Facebook advertisement, that person is arguing about a separate topic. I'm trying to address the way that you understand financial ramifications given the system we have. That is entirely different. If you want to solve the fact that the CT scan shouldn't cost $3,000, that is an entirely different debate. You're talking about healthcare policy. You're talking about the hospital system. You're talking about the cost to become a medical doctor. You're talking about the cost of the technology of the CT machine. It's got nothing to do with the rules of roulette, the cost of the chips, and the payouts you get if your number happens to arrive.
So let's move on to a slightly different example, but the same roulette table. Okay, so we'll call this one example B. Under this situation, you still have the same two players. Two men, same age. Mr. Bulletproof, Mr. 900 pound. Okay? Now, however, the minimum amount that you have to wager at any time is $500. Okay? You can place the chips wherever you want, but you must use $500. What happens then? Right, because this is a different situation versus the $1 chip or the $1 million per chip, and you've got to put one each, right? So it's $500 every time to play. What would end up happening? Well, what would end up happening is also, somewhat clear-ish, but certainly more complicated. Certainly more complicated. What is it? Well, what it is that the person who's 170 pounds says, the likelihood of winning for me collecting anything is so bad because, in other words, getting health benefits is bad. Why? I'm never sick. Doesn't matter. So why would I use even $1? I don't want to use $1, much less 500. To Mr. 900 pounds, however, that is different. That's different. Right? In other words, the probability of collecting benefits is so high, $500, even if all he has is $600, may be worth it. So you can see it again, right? The rules of the payouts, no matter what they are the same for both players. Nevertheless, the two players, because of their individual situation, value the $500 differently. Right? One, because he's Mr. Bulletproof. The other one is 900 pounds with, 60 units of insulin a day. They are going to value the probability of payout far differently from one another. Now let's move to option C, or now let's move to example C. Okay? Now it's $500 in order to wager. You must wager $500 at roulette. Okay? However, 170-pound person is a multimillionaire. And the 900-pound person is penniless. Now what happens? A little different, and a different outcome, right? A different outcome for sure. Why is that? Well, the reason is that
Mr. Perfect, who has many millions of dollars, he knows that the probability of requiring healthcare services is very, very low. He's Mr. Perfect. Nevertheless, he knows there's a slight probability. He has no crystal ball. Something weird could happen at some point. And to him, $500 is not a lot of money because he has, $500 is always a lot of money, but to him, he doesn't value that $500 compared to the losses if he does require healthcare services, even if the probability today is low. That makes him very, very different than Mr. 900 pounds, who has both no money because for whatever reason he doesn't have that amount of financial resources, and his probability of needing to play this roulette spin is very, very high. In a nutshell, then, you can see what actually I do. These simple examples, A, B, C, they actually can be drawn to exactly what I do in every financial topic. Right? In other words, number one, what did I do? Number one, I assess the probability. I assess the probability without discrimination or distraction. Right? There are 38 slots. It's perfectly random, was the first base case. Right? I assessed what the payout is compared to the probability. That was my base case. And then what did I do? I adjusted the base case. To what? I adjusted for the fact that Mr. Perfect is 170 pounds, never sick, or you know what I'm saying, which is, excellent health. In other words, a house living on a desert where there's no rain, there's no elements, and no wood-burning stove. Same thing. In other words, I assess the probability for that particular situation. Then what did I do? Other situations. I assessed their financial ability to pay. They're assessed whether or not their personal financial resources were appropriate to pay the market price as determined by rules that were given to us. And literally that's it. It doesn't matter what financial situation you're talking about. It could be life insurance. It could be annuity. It could be whether or not you're accepting Social Security at a particular age or not. What am I doing? I'm first thinking about the base case and then adjusting for your individual situation. What am I not assessing here? Did you hear me ask you what your political affiliation is? Did you hear me ask you what your theological positions are? Did I accuse you of being a baby killer? Did I accuse you of being a socialist? Nope. If it wasn't clear to you, the answer was no. Right? In other words, those variables and those situations, scenarios, examples are done without discrimination of any sort. And now you can understand how stunned I am when I try to discuss financial matters with people. They don't understand the base case about how the payout works. They don't understand how their particular situation can alter their value to playing roulette. Okay? To playing roulette. And then And then when they object because they don't understand most people understand, right? But rather than taking the time to actually understand those steps, what do? They heard it from their friend, some other objection about a politician, an insurance company, whether or not a CT scan should cost $3,000. All not necessarily having to do anything with the steps that we've taken on this podcast so far. Has nothing to do with it. Nevertheless, that's the objection that comes up.
Now, just as importantly as kind of and part of, very related to, these examples is, let's just say you're now the 170-pound Mr. Perfect, right? The one who's the multimillionaire. What does he understand? He understands easily $500 is not much of his net worth. He can afford it, even if it's highly improbable for him to actually use it. Okay? From here, you get a whole set of objections. Whole set of objections from people. And we'll go through them. Number one, the ball spins. He's used the $500. It doesn't come up where he's placed the chips. Does not. He then says, this is a stupid game. I'm never going to play again. Why? Because I never get back my $500. So this is flawed. This is flawed. And it's flawed for two reasons. Number one is this person eliminated the logic prior to the ball spinning. Right? In other words, the probability of landing in a spot is 1 out of 38. We agreed that in the description of how this roulette wheel works. However, after the ball has spun, in that instance, the answer either 0, meaning the ball didn't land in your spot, or 1, the ball landed in your spot. It's 0 or 1. It's not 1 out of 38. It isn't. It's either 0 or 1, period. That's it. Okay? But making that determination after the fact can be called, as we know, as a sports addict that I am, watching ESPN. Well, not watching ESPN now, but watching ESPN. This is Monday morning quarterbacking. This is absolutely Monday morning quarterbacking. This is the cliche of hindsight 2020. Actually, hindsight is actually better than 2020, isn't it? Right? In other words, hey, I had this logic. I determined that $500 was worth it, and here was my reasoning. And then after the fact, after the ball has spun and lands in a slot, and it happens to not be your slot, then the accusations fly. This is Monday morning quarterbacking. Okay? And as a result, the second mistake being made is, I'm not going to play on the second spin because of the result of the first spin. Doesn't work that way. Okay? And I'll change the topic here. This is, and the analogy I love to use, one of my favorite analogies, is this is very similar to forecasting a hurricane. Right? In other words, the hurricane is forecasted to hit Miami Beach. The hurricane very rarely directly hits Miami Beach, doesn't it? It may go to the south, to the Keys. It may go to the north, to Fort Lauderdale. The number of times that it hits directly at Miami Beach is not hardly any. Right? In other words, and you can see this when you see hurricane, we're coming up to hurricane season, right? What will we see? We will see cones of probability, ranges of where it could be. We will not see with certainty that it hits exactly the spot it was projected to land. And to show you just how similar these topics are and how appropriate this analogy is, what happens after a weather forecast is made? People take cover and then it passes. Ooh, the weatherman, he's never right. Is that not the case? Right? In other words, human nature can't resist the Monday morning quarterbacking exercise and says, you went through all that trouble and, weatherman's never right. It's kind of like an economist. And just as importantly, the next hurricane system approaches. Okay? The fact that the prior hurricane didn't directly hit Miami Beach. So what, you're going to ignore the next hurricane and the next hurricane forecast? Is that what you're going to do? The answer is no, or it should be, right? But what ends up happening in financial matters? It didn't work out, so forget it. My $500 is gone, and I didn't get anything from it. And as a result, I'm not going to wager the $500 on the next spin. You can see it. In other words, the common sense in you says, look, another forecast, a hurricane is forecast here. You still board up your house. You know why? Because, yes, I live in Miami Beach, and I know the fact that it didn't hit there directly. The next forecast is to hit Miami Beach again. It didn't hit last time. Well, you know better. You still have to board up your house because it could hit this time. When it comes to financial matters, what ends up happening is people, they throw away their logic. They throw away the logic that they would have used in the hurricane situation, where you're talking about some probability of something happened, but then some range of error that it doesn't hit exactly. And instead, what kind of things do I hear? I hear, well, I didn't get anything from my $500. Okay? You don't hear, well, I didn't get anything out of the money that I used to buy the wood to board up my house. You see what I'm saying? In other words, you still have what? You've got something with a probability in advance. You know what the cost to try to protect yourself or to do something with. You use money to protect yourself in the instance that it does or does not occur. Yet in the hurricane situation, we go, okay, well, a new hurricane's coming here, so we're going to have to do it again. You have no choice. People do it, right? And then, on the other hand, in financial matters, they use a different set of logic. Exactly what I said at the beginning of this podcast. So the reality is I go on and on, right? I mean, literally the number of examples that I could give on variations on this similar type of exercise, this spin of the roulette wheel, before and after, the price, the payout, and then who the different buyers would be. This similar exercise, I could create basically an uncountable number of different situations, right? That is the case. Every person's slightly different. Every buyer is not as discreet, not as far away as 170-pound Mr. Perfect versus Mr. 900-pound, right? They're not that. There's all sorts of shades of gray in between those two, participants. I think we can agree. Nevertheless, as I just said, right, the analysis, the way that we go through this process, the way that we examine the exercise of the ball spinning on this wheel, where we don't know where it's going to land, is quite similar no matter what the underlying situation is, meaning that we need to know what the base case is. We need to know it well first. We absolutely need to know it well, and then we need to make adjustments.
So rather than telling you about Medicare, Medicare Advantage, Medigap, auto insurance, uninsured motorist rider, elimination period, maximum benefit amount, guaranteed lifetime income rider, all of this jargon. I've just rattled off 10 different terms: deductible, co-payment, co-insurance, annual out-of-pocket maximum. The list goes on and on. Okay, and the reason I give you that list is I now tell you what I'm doing here, right? So you can see what I'm do in guiding the two participants at the roulette table, the roulette wheel, how to analyze it for themselves. How, in other words, how does it affect that person? Without discrimination towards political party, et cetera, color of skin, theological belief. Bluntly put, Humana doesn't have a place in its application to check off whether or not you're a Democrat or Republican. They don't. I checked. Right? The reality is the similar type of exercise happens in every aspect of every financial choice you make. The easiest, the most obvious, or the one that dominates most people's attention as they approach retirement is when to take Social Security. When to take Social Security. And you have what you have in the real world today, unfortunately, is you've got articles 1,000 words long. And they say, well, you should defer because of 3 bullet points. The issue is it didn't adjust for the two participants. It didn't. And then all of the other shades of gray in the middle. It presumes these articles, generally speaking, I'm not saying all of them, but generally speaking, what happens is they give you rules of thumb. But guess what? I gave you a rule of thumb, which is the case on the roulette wheel. Did not apply the same to Mr. Perfect versus Mr. 900 pounds. Didn't. So as a result, what ends up happening is people say, I read this article in Kiplinger's and it said X. I read this article in money.com and I read this 300-word article, so I'll take that as the advice that should be applicable to me. I heard it from my buddy, and it worked out. Your buddy doesn't know that you have a DNA and a family history, which would have changed your life, life expectancy. Your buddy doesn't know that you have this dream to take this vacation or to build I guess vacation's out in an era of pandemic, but you can understand my point. You have some financial objective and it's time sensitive. In other words, the average case, the base case, may be radically altered for your individual situation. So you can understand what I'm saying of when I see people make errors. That at first they don't understand the math of the roulette wheel and how the payouts work and the cost. And then they don't adjust for their own situation. And then they Monday morning quarterback because they've made some mistake along the way and they didn't like the outcome. And the funny thing is that if I change the topic to the hurricane, which has the same kind of probability thought process, uncertain, forecast, the people who made these hurricane models, let's just agree that they're pretty good at science. They didn't come up with these hurricane forecasting models out of a Cracker Jack box. Right? I mean, these are some smart people. And the thing is that that everyday people, they use their common sense. Yeah, they were lucky that that it didn't hit. Another one's coming. They didn't throw away their logic. They didn't throw away their logic. They didn't throw away the forecast. They're boarding up their house the second time. By far the majority. Let's not talk about the weird people who make the, Instagram or TikTok, videos saying we survived, this bogus forecast. No, I'm not talking about that person. I'm talking about the rational person, rational actor, in their own self-best interest. In their own self-best interest. Yes, I got it right. Okay. So anyway, you can hear it. You can see it. What ends up happening? The number of errors, the different types of errors that I see every day, all the time on financial matters along this path. Too many to count. Too many to count. And guess what? It doesn't matter if you have a PhD. It doesn't matter if you've never graduated high school. You can't actually predict who's going to choose. I can't predict necessarily who's going to act wrongly. And this is why for subscribers to the Maximizing Your Medicare newsletter, I with admiration refer to someone called Farmer Fred. Farmer Fred did not have a PhD. He has passed away, but Farmer Fred did not. But when we discussed Medicare, he knew clearly what I was saying. He understood there was a cost to the chip. He understood what he was doing it for. He understood what the payout would be if a certain situation occurred. We didn't talk politics. We didn't talk, the fact that they got tons of advertisements and flyers in the mail. We kept our eye on the exercise without being distracted. Farmer Fred decided conclusively for he and his wife, his household. He knew its function. He didn't try to introduce other extenuating circumstances, other impertinent facts or opinions. He kept his eye on the function of what was trying to be accomplished at that roulette table and decided what was best for him. I bring up the example because ultimately, as a financial planner, what I'm doing is then a combination because it's not only one exercise. It's not only one exercise of Social Security. It's not only one exercise of do I need life insurance. It's not only one exercise is dental insurance worth it? Should I have short-term liability? Do I need an annuity? Does my portfolio, fit my circumstance? Right? All of those are individual exercises. And they have individual, different jargon, terminology, crossfire, criticisms. So let me be your guide here we're running out of time and I don't want to talk for 2 hours and you certainly don't want to listen for 2 hours. So number one, just like Farmer Fred, follow the cash flow. Follow the cash flow, right? Just like the roulette table, we knew how much the chip was. We knew what we would get back if something happened. The fact of the matter is that what is difficult about financial topics is you've got all of this jargon, crazy, right? Guaranteed lifetime benefit, participation rate, cap on annuities, for example, deferred income annuity, single premium immediate annuity, long-term care, universal life insurance with it goes on and on and on and on, right? My advice to persons when we're analyzing these choices is You're looking for a defined function, and then you are clearly identifying the cash flow. Period. All of that language is there to change the pattern of the cash flow. It's my job to explain this to you. It's your job to keep your focus on following the cash flow, that it fits what you are trying to accomplish. Now you can understand, I'm going to be biased here, right? Is that some persons have the ability to analyze that by yourself at home. It's not the majority. I'll just put it as kindly as I can, right? You can be expert at Phoenician, but we're maybe talking Mandarin, right? It's my job to translate the Mandarin into a language you can understand, and that language should be follow the cash flow. Second is that it looks, and this will be my last point, is that these topics are, because of the way that they are sold to you, the way that they are presented to you, and the way that your friends, your neighbors, and other people have done it. People try to fragment these different topics from one another, especially when it comes to their financial planning. So let's just take a look at some of these topics. What are they? Health insurance, life insurance, long-term care, investments, lifetime income. Okay, let's just broadly call it those topics. And there are all sorts of variations, but okay. What ends up happening here is people try to segment them and fragment them into different areas and as if they're separate topics. That defeats the purpose. That is limited. And the reason is the following, is that financial problems don't occur when one thing goes wrong, because I can fix one thing. Financial problems occur when multiple things go wrong at the same time. Murphy's Law. When it rains, it pours. Right? Your simple example, portfolio down, and then you need to go to a nursing home. Right? And then, and only, so what ends up happening is people try to think of the two as separate. That's natural. I can understand that. Why? The stockbroker knows nothing about long-term care. They don't understand what elimination period is. They don't understand that long-term care insurance needs to have, medical underwriting. And they're just doing their thing. I like Apple. I like Facebook. Okay? But the reality is, my job is dealing with the entire household pie. The entire pie. And what are the payouts under different circumstances? The most harmful I just mentioned to you. Portfolio down, and then you have this big cost that you did not plan for. This is your overall household pie, is what you're trying to protect, maximize. Maximize your household net worth. That is, so you can understand, Maximize Your Medicare, my book, is a subset of it. It's a subset of it. I'll end there because why? Because Medicare is the singular spot where the payouts are the best and the prices are the lowest. Full stop. Available to you no matter what your net worth is. You can send me questions. JAE@maximizeyourmedicare.com. You can also send it to my financial planning website, JAE at GH2benefits, BENEFITS.com. Either one of those will work. The reality is today's podcast is the most important podcast that I can name because it actually links together every other podcast that I've spoken about. All the nuances of Medicare are really to do what? Preserve the payout. To identify what the cash flow looks like. To identify the payout when you stand at the roulette wheel. I'm Jay. Please subscribe to the podcast. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. Pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts, you can subscribe to the Maximize Your Medicare podcast. It's actually much more than Medicare. Please give it a 5-star review. Allows other people to discover Maximize Your Medicare. I'm Jay. Speak with you the next time.